that I put together on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So the topic we'll be looking at tonight is listening within to improve your relationships without, so to speak. And so I'm going to switch to my slideshow, to sharing my screen here so you can see all the slides that I've prepared. In this webinar, we're going to explore a little bit why it's so important for you to be really in touch with what's going on with you and why that matters to relationships. We'll also look at how challenging it is to actually be honest with yourself and others, and how to know what happens when you're triggered, because that's often when we're most compelled to share, even though maybe that's not the best time to share, and a little bit about what that does when we try to listen within when we're already upset about something. And then we'll delve into ways for you to listen for feelings, to listen within for feelings, and also how to unpack your own narrative, your story about something, so that you can bring clarity to your relationships. And then I've got a little playful tool that you can explore for sharing collaboratively with others. And for those of you that are interested in the art of facilitation, I'll say a few words about that as well. So I love this picture of this woman who's holding her head in her stomach, because so much that's what happens when we try to share. What we do know about relationships is that relationships do really well when we can have transparency, when we actually can share what we know and what we think, and when people in relationships are accountable to each other, when you can sort of trust the other person will do what they say, and the relationship is collaborative. We're on the same team. And what we know about relationships, both at work and in the family, is that these conditions create what we often call safety, an experience of being safe and being able to be ourselves in a relationship. And that's when we're usually our best and our most creative and most relaxed. So it's not just for our close relationships that this kind of safety is important. Transparency is the basis of safety, and safety is the basis of trust. If you can imagine these two guys on the crane here, you would really hope that they're being straight with each other as they try and figure out how to move that cable on that crane, so that they can trust that the other person is really going to do what they say they will. Trust is the basis of agreements. And our whole society, all those skyscrapers, all those buildings, all the things that we build as social animals are built on these agreements. So trust, safety, agreements, these are all really important components of good relationships. And they all require that we know ourselves. Now, I'm borrowing something that's often used in the organizational consulting world, and it's called the Johari window, from Joe and Harrison, who developed this idea. And I put the I got issues up there from a popular song right now. I got issues, you got yours. And as long as we don't judge each other, we can get along. So the window here shows that we really can only share what we know. So there's an area in a relationship where, you know, something is known to me and something is known to you, and so we both know that. We might be sharing about a particular experience that we both know that we had. What I may know and you may not is what that experience meant to me, and likewise for you. And beyond that, there may be an area where neither of us knows. It's not something I know. I might not remember how that experience. Perhaps we were in a minor traffic accident as we were going to a restaurant together. And perhaps for me, that reminds me of a previous traumatic experience, and for you, it doesn't. And neither of us know how that event has shaped the way we think about our relationship. So there's places that we both know, places that I may know but you may not, and you may know and I may not, and things that we both don't know. In our close relationships, We want to do what we can to open that window where we know each other, where it's known to both. So this idea of really knowing yourself, it's a little more complicated than it seems, because who we are, our sense of ourself, is built on many different things. We are social creatures, so the way that we construct a self depends on our physical attributes, what we come in with, our intelligences, our temperament, our personal experiences. A lot of who we are, however, is also shaped by the roles that we can play. If I'm in a situation where I could go to school as a woman and become a nurse or have a professional role, that's going to change my sense of self. If I'm in a country, I was just reading a book called Women Who Dig on women farmers around the world, where the only option for me is to, be a wife and a farmer. That's going to define a lot of what I can think about, what I can feel about myself. So a lot of what we experience as me is actually given to us by our culture, by our language, by our family history. I could be born into wealth, I could be born into poverty. These things all shape what we feel and think about ourselves. And so oftentimes these other things are part of our narrative, but we don't really know where they come from, and we don't really know how they affect us. And so it can be hard to, quote, be honest in a relationship. It's not so easy to do that. On top of all that, we have a sort of animal body. And that animal body is those of you who may have gone to the refrigerator like this guy, intending to get some healthy carrots, but ending up with a sugary donut hole. We have multiple motivations. We have even conflicted feelings. And sometimes even our own behavior is confusing to us. So this idea of being honest with your partner or being honest with people at work, it's a little harder than it may seem. And this is why I've used the word transparency. Transparent is actually being able to share what you know. So in order to find out, what do I know? What do I have access to? Well, I have kind of two sources. I can go inside. I can pay attention to my feelings, my emotions, my sensations in my body. I can pay attention to my story, the narrative that I tell myself about who I am and what's important to me. I also have external cues. I can listen to what other people say and what they do. I can wonder what they think about me, and I can have my story about that. For this webinar, we're going to look at my feelings and my story. We're going to go on the inside, listening within. So one thing I've learned in working with clients for many years and trying to find out what's really going on when people get stuck in a pattern in relationship is that what we think of as, my real feelings, honesty, oftentimes we're actually acting out of a triggered state, or we're in the grip of a story, or we're in the grip of a feeling. And so honesty really requires us to get out of our own view of our situation. And transparency is when we're able to share. We feel able to fully share what we know about our experience with another person. And it's lovely if we can also take into account how we share with them. So we'll be looking at that a bit later in the webinar. When the words in our head match the feeling in our body, we feel solid, we feel congruent, and yet we can still be totally triggered. So what I've learned in working with people is when we're in a triggered state, what comes up for us when we try to listen within is what's true for us in that moment, but it isn't necessarily the whole of our experience, and it isn't necessarily our deeper truth. So it's important when you're trying to really find out how you feel about something or what to do about a situation to pay attention to that. Because the way that you feel in the moment affects the way that you perceive yourself and other people. So, if you're in a state where you're relatively calm, you're curious about what's going on, and you're willing to accept the way you feel. You're willing to accept your thoughts, to look at them and have them, and start from there. You're probably in a good place to listen within. If, however, you're triggered, you're activated, you're in fight, flight, or a kind of activated freeze, or you're looping around in the same story over and over again, justifying your position, or you feel helpless and victimized. Anybody ever recognize any of those? If you do, that's probably a clue that you're actually still in a triggered state. You're still perhaps responding to something rather than actually having the freedom to deeply inquire within. So I was having a conversation with a colleague, and she said, well, I want to know, I want to really feel, and I want to get clear for myself what's important to me, but how do I know if it's just my crap, my stuff, not really the truth for myself? What's really important to me? How do I know if I'm just floating around in my triggered stuff? So this is why I want to elaborate on this a little bit, and I want to give you a chance to just play with this idea that your state is going to shape the way you perceive things. The context that you're in, if you're just coming out of a hot argument with your boss, or you're just in the thick of it with your partner, that's going to shape the meaning that you make out of the experience that you're having. So this is just a little experiment I want you to try with me. So I want you to think of an emotionally charged event. It can be a personal experience. It can be something that you read about or heard about that was impactful for you. It doesn't have to be a negative. It can be a positive experience or a positive uh, event. On a scale of 1 to 10, though, where 1 is who cares and 10 are the biggies of life, I invite you to choose something that's like a 4 or 5. It's meaningful, but not, too upsetting. So what I'd like you to do is try reviewing this event in your mind's eye in 2 different states. In the first state, and so you can do this as I talk, I want you to clench your jaw, really hold your teeth together, cross your arms and cross your legs and hold them tight. So get yourself set up. And now I want you to just take a minute or 2 and kind of review that experience, kind of run the movie in your mind, and I'll be quiet for a minute or so. And then I want you to notice when you stop your first impressions. Okay, now try to bring that to a close. Okay, so just notice what that experience was like for yourself. Now I'm going to invite you to stand up. Please, if you're sitting, do stand up all the way and give yourself a little shake. Really shake that one off. Let that tension go. I want you to take a few really nice deep breaths. Remember to inhale deeply and exhale slowly. As you're doing these deep breaths, I'm going to invite you to remember something pleasant or think of something that you enjoyed. Just let yourself leave that behind and relax your jaw. Okay, so now I'd like you to sit back down in that nice relaxed state and make sure you're comfortable. And now I'm going to give you a minute to review the same movie. Okay. So now, again, notice your first impressions. Notice how you feel about that event. And I would love to invite a few people to share, like, what was your experience of those two states, thinking about the same event. Just love to have a few comments from people. So if you'd like to comment, just unmute your mic and turn on your video so we can see you, and tell us what your experience was like. Somebody be brave. Just unmute your mic and turn on your, there we go, Tracy.
Hi.
Hi, Tracy. What was that like for you?
So my situation was a scenario where I talked with someone. I was backing out of a contract with them.
Mm.
And it was really devastating for them.
Wow.
And so in the first position, I just felt really defensive. Like I felt guilty.
Mm-hmm.
I felt guilty in both scenarios. Like
Yeah.
I felt bad for causing this harm, even though I
Sure.
knew what I was doing needed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I noticed like just a lot more just emotional defensiveness, just a desire to kind of protect myself from being accused of being a bad person. Or
Sure. That's a difficult situation for sure.
yeah, and in this, like, I struggled in both with a kind of desire to collapse because I felt bad
Mm-hmm.
about myself about it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second one, I felt like I was able to come from more love, not just for them, but for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, actually, there's research that says self-compassion is really more important than, quote, self-esteem.
Right.
And, when we can actually have our body relaxed, our heart can relax too.
It was hard because I was like, oh, wow, I probably would have talked to this person a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could do it again.
Right. But now now you can actually take your own body state in consideration when you're in a situation like that.
Yeah. It was interesting too because it was a scenario where I needed to be assertive and not let it
Mm-hmm.
drag on. And in the actual situation, I let it drag on and it was
Uh-huh.
pretty bad.
Uh-huh.
So being able to have a bit more of an open, relaxed stance kind of supported me to be assertive. Like I
Right.
felt like I didn't need to
Mm-hmm.
collapse and linger.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. That's
Yeah.
really an interesting set of reflections. Yeah, for sure. And thanks. That's a hard situation. So yeah.
Yeah. It was recent, so I felt like
Oh,
it was
wow.
relevant.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much. Yeah. Let me hear from one other person. Thanks, Tracy. Someone else might share. See if someone else is brave. Or not. Okay. Hopefully some of you had the same. What we know is that when we can manage to keep our physical state in a more relaxed state, that our perception is different, our options are different. Just as Tracy is pointing out, we have a few more choices available to us, and it also it affects our assessment. It affects how we, the kinds of thoughts we think and the feelings we think. So there's a malleability to, what we hear and experience when we listen within. And if we're not aware of that, we might, want to listen within at a moment where we're not really present for ourselves as well as the other person that we might be dealing with. Of course, that's kind of the catch-22 of the whole deal, because we often want to get to the heart of those feelings. We want to get to the root of that when we are the most triggered. So part of the art is being able to create some space for yourself to say, I need a minute, let me get back to you. Giving yourself the space to be able to really to find out if you're triggered, and if you're activated, you're collapsed, that's another option, or you're rigid and inflexible, holding your breath, or you feel really panicky and chaotic, distracted by past or future thoughts. And you're not in this place where you're calm enough to inquire within and listen. Then you really need a little bit of a break before you try to check in with yourself. When you are really able to move fluidly from one state to the other, when you're really breathing, when you're able to take another's perspective as well as holding on to your own, and you're in the present moment, then you probably have a good chance of getting to your deeper truth and your deeper, your best self, if you want to say. At the same time, I do want to say that triggers can be useful. If I'm triggered, I can ask myself questions and say, what is it about this that's triggering to me? Of course, having to break a contract would be triggering for anybody. That's a hard one. The context is really important. Is this something that's a pattern for me? Is it something that I'm worried about that hasn't happened? What's important to me right now about this? And then just taking a moment in the middle of the trigger to name the feeling for yourself, describe it, imagine what might feel better in that situation. And listen, and we'll do this a little more depth, for the most basic want or need that is driving the trigger. So there's some ways you can actually use a triggered situation to your advantage when you need to check in with yourself on the fly in a real, face-to-face, it's real life kind of situation. There are, of course, it's not so easy. There are reasons we don't listen within. Some of them are these triggers. We just are, we're the person in the refrigerator. Somebody else is kind of running the show for us right now. We're in the thick of a difficult situation, and it's hard to be calm enough to listen. The other reason is we might be afraid that if we really felt something, it might cause us to make a choice that we are not ready to make. Or we're afraid that if we acted out of our truth, there'd be consequences. Another area where we often feel ourselves blocked is whether or not our family allowed us to have all of our feelings. So, were we allowed to be a happy child or a sad or angry, and were those feelings reflected by the people around us accurately and appropriately? Or were our parents, not willing to allow certain feelings? Were we punished or shamed for being sad, for instance? Or if we were angry, nobody responded. There was no response. So we didn't really learn how to have some of those feelings. And those do become our blind spots, because those are feelings that we don't really have a name for. We haven't learned how to use them. They're important for us. All feelings are important. So sometimes our stories are built all the way around trying not to feel something that we're not supposed to feel. And yet really once we can name and feel that, it shifts everything. The other common reason why people don't want to go within or they're uncomfortable is that what's the point of going within if you can't share it? If the only way you know how to share with somebody is to unload on them, and you don't know how to create a collaborative conversation that takes both parties' needs into account, it may seem kind of pointless to know what you feel. So there's lots of reasons why we don't allow ourselves to really know what we feel, to really unpack our stories. And it's helpful just to notice those things, to be mindful of those, to be alert to that, and be curious if you come across sort of, the edge of the map where it says, here there be dragons, and you've not been bold enough to go in there before. Curiosity is your best friend. It's your best tool for going into places that you haven't been before. And sorry for my little thing here. Curiosity, listening within requires presence and curiosity. We need to be willing to stop. Even in the middle of difficult situations, sometimes we can ask a person to give us some time. We need our breath. Your whole nervous system is riding with your breath, so being able to manage your breath, letting your mind and body settle, is really important for true deep listening within. And we need to listen to learn, not to reinforce our story, not to defend ourselves against the other person's story, but listen to really learn. What is it that's going on for me right now? What is my deeper truth? So in order to really listen to our feelings, and I'm borrowing a little bit of this from Eugene Gendlin's work, his groundbreaking work on focusing And if you want to know more about that, you can go to focusing.org. He was a phenomenologist and a philosopher, really, and so he was really interested in subjective experience, what we feel inside. So his suggestions, and I've added a few of my own here, are to create a quiet space, to have some intentionality, even if that means, stepping outside of the meeting room for a moment and just taking a few breaths. Choose one topic or situation to focus on. It's really easy when a lot is going on inside of us for us to ping pong around and bounce from one to the other, and then really end up feeling confused. So if you're triggered by your boss's, presentation in a meeting, and or demand that's on you, or something your partner said, pick that thing and focus on it. Next, notice the sensations that arise, the actual physical experience. Is there a hot spot in your belly? Do you feel like your chest is made of, water and you're just kind of folding in on it? Are your legs like jelly? What really is that feeling experience? So allow yourself to have some time to really notice those sensations. Once you have kind of really noticed where is it, what are the sensations that go with that experience, then it's really helpful to allow a word or phrase to arise in you. Sometimes it's an image that allows you to find a word or phrase that really describes that experience. So let's just say I've been in a meeting, I'm really upset, my boss has been maybe indirectly, but everybody knows who, saying that I didn't perform in the way I was supposed to, and I feel that I did. So I'm feeling really tight and angry. I might go out in the hall for a few minutes and just take a breath and really say, what is going on for me right now? And feel like that kind of hot ball of anger in my chest, and allow myself to, feel my breathing and the tension that might be in my throat. And as I do that, I'm going to probably feel like I'm wronged, I'm angry, he's unfair. All of those words are going to come to my mind. And if I sit with those long enough and wait for the right word and feeling to come up, the word might be, I feel invisible. I feel not seen. And that might be what really resonates with the feeling that I have. And that I might find underneath that anger is actually a fear that I'm not going to get a place. And so as I go through and really check the feeling and the word and get them to resonate, and then ask myself, what is the most basic need, desire, or wish that is driving that feeling? I'm going to come to more of a rock bottom need. And mine might be, in my family, I had a hard time. People rode all over me as a kid. Maybe I was the youngest kid. And I always was worried that they were going to get on the car and leave me behind. Maybe that happened once. So I really am fearful about having my place. And that's really what I need, is to be acknowledged that I have a place. Now, I may, when I think of what I really want, I might think, I really want my boss to apologize and to, acknowledge that I do make a contribution, and I might have all these ideas come to mind. It's really more important to remember to be open to possibilities. And it might be, as I think about it later, to realize that I have an important place, because my boss in his own way was angry, but he wasn't also just dressing me down in the meeting. He was protecting me a little bit. And it might not be until I go through this whole process that I realize that he was seeing me and he was giving me a place. But from where I started with the feeling, I couldn't get to that information. Or it may be that I need to go to him and have a conversation and say, look, when you do things so indirectly, I get confused. So if I allow myself, when I get to that bottom place, to stay open to possibilities, then in my relationship with the other person, new things can happen beyond what I may think of. And that's where we get into some of the magical places. I might also be telling myself a story out there in the hallway. Of course, I want to know what's the context. Well, in this case, I'm using an example of me and my boss. And I'm going to think, what part of that whole thing really got me? You know, and I'm using something called the daisy model here. So in the middle of the daisy is my story. There's many petals, many aspects, many views into that story. And if I kind of open up that daisy and unpack those petals, I'm going to get a deeper understanding of my own experience and how that fits in relationship to the situation that I'm in. So again, I might notice the feeling that I have. You know, it's this hot burning ball in my chest that I feel. And it happened when he said somebody here didn't do XYZ. You know, that might be where I'm feeling it. And it's like this feeling of being invisible. So that might come up for me again. And then I might say, well, who else is involved? Well, it might be my boss, my coworker, a client. And if I was to stand on their petals in this story, what would I see that might be different? Well, maybe the client was inconvenienced and maybe they're a little impatient. And I could have some sympathy for that. Maybe my coworker is just as nervous and upset as I am. Don't know. Maybe my boss is, both likes my work and is frustrated that I didn't deliver this time. By standing on the different petals in the model there, I have a chance to expand my story. I also can ask myself, what does this my story, like I never get seen, they are always picking on me, whatever it is. If I ask myself, what is that story doing for me? I might find in this case, it's protecting me a little bit from the times when I really don't live up to my, best self. And, feeling wronged is a way for me to kind of not have to face that this is a place where I didn't, communicate as well as I could have, or I didn't renegotiate an agreement in a timely manner. And then if I ask myself, if I know what the story's doing for me, how it functions for me, then I can ask myself, well, what would be at risk if I was to change my story? What I could make this a story about how it's a turning point for me, where I really began to step up to my full potential. So there might be things I could gain by allowing my story to change. Sometimes that might be a big risk if I let my story change. But at least I'm beginning to explore around the edges of the story, and I'm not just locked into the middle of that daisy. And that also opens up a field where there's new possibilities. So putting feelings and story together when I'm listening within, if I'm really in touch with, I've delved down into my feelings, I know what I feel, and I can describe my feelings in words that other people could understand. I also know what the most basic need is that's driving that. And I'm open to possibilities. I'm open to finding ways to address whatever is making me feel uncomfortable. If I'm going from the story route, I know what part of the story got me, a part of the episode or the story that I'm telling. I know what the context is, who the key players are. I've considered their point of view as well as my own. And I know what that story is doing for me. I've been honest with myself and looking at what that story is. How does it work? And if I was to change it, what's the risk and what's the gain? So at this point, I hope that it makes sense to you that, we've really been able to get a lot more clarity about what's going on for me. So that's the first part. That's the listening within. Now comes what is sometimes the more challenging part, which is being able to talk to somebody else about it. How do I share my experience with other people? So one of the first questions to ask is the feelings, if I'm talking about feelings, that I want to express, is this something that is okay to talk about here? I know a lot of folks, as they do their personal work, they sort of outgrow the agreements of what's okay and what's not okay that were part of their family of origin. and you find yourself wanting to express something that others can't understand. If you know that going into a conversation, and you can stand on that person's pedal and say, what could they understand about my need? Perhaps it's a need to be seen. And perhaps I really want to talk to my mom about this, let's say. Or I want to talk to my boss. And I want to be able to do that in a way that's constructive. I'm going to think about their world, and I'm going to think about in their world, what's a way for me to express this. And it might be to say to my boss, you know, I get really motivated when I get acknowledged in a meeting in a positive way. And I'm learning to step up when I don't show up. And I almost appreciate you addressing me directly on that instead of indirectly. So there's going to be consequences from that. And I need to think about that before I go in and ask for something. It might not be quite what I expect, or they might have something else in mind. At the same time, if I'm able to hold on to my needs and be open to considering the other person's needs or desires as well, I might learn something. For instance, my boss might say, well, you know, I know you're okay with that, but you're the coworker on the project there, I'm afraid that I really would be devastating for them if I were to be more direct about that. So we then can have more of a conversation about the other person's point of view as well as mine. And the other question to keep in mind is, you know, do I have the time to create an opening for the new possibilities? Let's say I have an argument with my partner. You know, the time to share my deep understandings is probably not while we're rushing to get in the car to go for an appointment. Maybe if we have a long drive, that might be a different time to, you know, share my new understandings. But it's important to create a context, to be able to create a frame around the conversation that invites the other person to join you and to listen. And what we know, again, is if you can be transparent, if you can keep your agreements, and if you're not transparent, you're probably going to make agreements you can't keep. If you're not honest with yourself, you'll probably make agreements you can't keep. So being able to be, you know, deeply in touch with yourself, be able to keep your agreements, be able to work with people in a collaborative relationship creates the safety that we need to feel like we can be ourselves and that we're going to be safe. And that's a lot of good things come from that. So when you get ready to share what you've harvested from your own examination of your experience, are you prepared for collaboration instead of being right? Are you willing to invite the other person to hear your view and or to hear their view rather than demand from them or to dump on them? Are you willing to create the time for this? Are you willing to tell the other person how you want them to hear you? Are you listening to learn? Are you open to new solutions? When you bring this attitude, I think you'll be surprised. This is a place that creates the space of possibility between us. And it's a much nicer way to deal with things. Now, there's a little tool that I'd like to share with you. It's called I call it Let's Make a Deal. And I'm borrowing some of this from a woman named Alison Armstrong, who wrote a book called The Queen's Code, which has some of this way of working in it. And the idea is, if you can create a more playful situation with the person you want to talk to, it's a place where you can really generate creative possibilities. And this is probably not something to take to things that are really deal breakers. Those need a bit more support than this tool. A deal breaker might be my partner wants a child, I don't. You know, those kinds of really big things that maybe need a little more care. But if it's, you know, a smaller thing, this can be a nice way to bring your feelings to somebody and to be able to let them join you in creating a possibility. So let's say maybe I'm peeved at my partner for always leaving the dining room table in a mess with, you know, computer and it looks like an office. And so if I want to, and I've really gotten it down to touch that I grew up in a messy house where it wasn't safe. Maybe there was a lot of yelling in my house. And so a messy table to me is it's kind of frightening, and it's unsettling. It doesn't make me feel safe. So I've learned about my need. I've learned about what I want, that I'm really the clear space that helps me feel safe. Now I want to be able to bring that to my partner. So I'm going to set the frame. I'm going to say, look, this isn't a big thing, and it's something that's important to me. And I wonder if you'd play a game with me and help me get more of what I need, or, and to honor what you need in this relationship. So then I'm going to say, we're going to both take turns. And the turns go like this. I'm going to say, if I had it all my way, this is what would happen. I'm going to tell the person, if I had my way, this is what that would provide me. And then I'm going to ask the person, what would you need from me to give this to me? So those are the three steps, if you will. Then the other person gets to do the same thing. So let's imagine that I do this with my partner, and I say, if I had it all my way, the dining room table would always be clean and ready for food, and it would be an oasis for me of order and calm. And what that gives me when I see a clean table is a sense of safety. I feel like life is okay, nothing bad's going to happen. It's really calming for me. And then I would let the other person have a turn. And let's say my partner said, well, I don't mean to make a mess, but if I had my way, I'd have a place to keep the things I need to do where I could see them. Because if I put things in on my office desk, I forget things that are important. And I would have a way to get access to my computer. So if we're talking, I can look something up. Okay? And what that gives me is a sense of being smart, because I can get my computer, and knowing that I'm going to remember things that are important. So now we've each taken a turn, and we've described, if I had it all my way, and what that would give me. Now comes what's the gap? So now I've learned, because I'm listening to learn, that the reason my partner keeps his stuff there is he's afraid he's going to forget things, and that he likes to feel smart when he can look things up and answer questions for me. So now we might be able to say, well, how could we create a place near the table, right near the table, where you can have that? And maybe I don't need the whole table clean, but I need this part clean. So now we can explore what's in the gap. And I can ask my partner, well, if I had this much of the table really orderly, you could have that back for your table, for your papers. And if the computer could be over here, I'd be fine with that, if that's fine for you. And then we can explore, what would you need from me to give this to you? And my partner might say, well, if I could have, like when I'm doing bills, if I could have a bit of a mess here, this is the best place for me to do it. So you get the idea. We get to be a little more playful. We get to be creative. We get to imagine what could be there that we might have thought was previously impossible. And it's the idea of creating, to knowing really what is going on for you, and to creating a real space of possibility, a real space of choice and options. So let's see here. So this is kind of, I'm going to open up for questions and answers right now, and just for some discussion. So often we first have to listen within to get clear before we can actually bring something to our partner. And if we're clear, we're less likely to be anxious. We're more likely to be able to listen to them. So on that note, I would like to, I'm going to stop sharing briefly right now and go back to the meeting, and find out if there are questions or comments. I would have one thing here on the chat, which I can't see right now. Yeah, just to see if there are any questions or comments or anything anyone would like to share. What stands out for you? Anyone want to share something from the conversation this evening? Please go ahead and speak up. Hi, Tracy.
I do. Hi.
Yeah.
I got lots.
Oh, good. Yeah. What's one thing that stands out for you?
I've been in a situation a lot recently where there's like a very triggered argument, and the person I'm with really needs me to speak my truth right now from my heart in order to feel like we're resolving it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm so anxious, I have no access to that.
Right.
Um, and we haven't been able to find a way for me to leave safely because that triggers major abandonment. And there's been
Mm-hmm.
situations between us in the past where I leave and then I just kind of ignore it and pretend it didn't
Mm-hmm.
happen and I don't come back.
Right.
So like I have a couple phrases in my head, but when I'm in the moment, it's really hard to get out of.
Mm-hmm. You're
Um,
flooded and triggered, right?
yeah, so just like any suggestion you would have as far as like how to handle that if I request politely to take a break and come back to it later, that that may be received as a threat instead of
Mm-hmm.
a safety.
Well, usually, what usually is helpful is to negotiate a time frame and really then do it. Say, I need 20 minutes. Because then the
Yeah.
other person, and like give yourself 20 minutes is often what we need to kind of like dial back down our own stress hormones.
Yeah.
So taking 20 minutes and going out, taking a walk and coming back. This is what we call catch and release. In other words, if they know if you're going to let them go and they know that you're coming back, you know, then they actually can feel safe that and you do, give yourself the 20 minutes to go out and have that little alone time.
And then there's a fear for me that like that whole 20 minutes, it's hard for me to relax because there's so much pressure on me getting
Mm-hmm.
back with my truth
Mm-hmm.
that like I'm terrified that I won't have it in time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's
Well,
just like this spiral.
sure, but you can always frame that. You can say, "This is what I know right now. May not be my whole truth, but this is the response I can give you right now." And
Yeah.
that's transparent. Remember, we don't have access to everything in all those boxes all the time. That's
Right.
just being transparent. This is saying, this is what I know right now.
Yeah.
And so, it's a little bit of negotiating and asking for a little more space. It's like, here's what I can tell you today. And that moves the conversation a little bit farther.
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Okay.
often, when we're triggered, it's really hard to remember that there's often more space here and more possibilities
Yeah.
than
Especially when
when we're
it's an
not.
issue of poor timing on my part or something. It's like
Yeah.
there's not a lot of patience on the other side for poor
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Choosing your time is really helpful. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Tracy,
Thank you.
for your sharing. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to just take a few minutes, if I may. I'm going to go back to share my screen to just say a few words. Um, let's see if I can do this gracefully. About why we're doing these webinars and what this is all about. So some of you may know that we are, a lot of the skills that I'm talking about here, these are skills actually that we discuss in the first module of the Art of Facilitation. Because part of the skill of constellation work and other things that we do is these kinds of quick negotiations with people and being able to be authentic and be true in ourselves while we're in the service of another person. That's a really important skill in facilitation, and it's something that we do develop in folks that come to this training. So in particular in Module 1, this is one of our big focuses. So we are going to have 3 modules. It starts October 17th, The Art of Inquiry, where we delve into all of these kinds of conversations that we can have with people, our own regulation strategies, our clients' regulation strategies, mastering effective ways to get to the heart of the issue. Sometimes it's our issue we need to do that with. And the second module, we start to look at the dynamics and the patterns that we create together and to recognize how to shift those patterns in language and ways that we can just understand how the pictures that we live in, what they do and how to change those. And in the last one, we're really looking at um, how to stand up in a leadership role, how to deal with not just a person, but if you're in front of a team or you're working with other groups, how to deal with groups and how to sponsor and help solutions emerge within a group with a client, sometimes with yourself. So that's the training that's coming up, October, January, and May. You can go to our website, humansystemsinstitute.com, for more information on that. And yeah, that would conclude our webinar for tonight. The next one is September 12th, and that one is how to be safe in groups. And many people are not that comfortable in groups, and we'll be exploring that and discussing some strategies for creating a sense of well-being in a group. So I hope you will join us for that as well. So thank you very much for joining me this evening. Thank you, Tracy, for your lovely sharing and for modeling honesty with us. I really appreciate that. So wish you all a good evening wherever you may be, and thank you so much for stopping in.